Welcome everybody. I am Alasdair Mac Roibeirt. We are here on for a class for doing a an overview of historical camp and house seating for chairs and benches and such usable by the SCA. There's gonna be a little bit in here, kind of wide ranging. Not everything that is possible is covered by any means of the imagination. These are just things that I've seen fairly common and things that I have made myself or seem to be particularly enjoyed. So you might find things that you personally have done or have witnessed that I don't cover. Like I said, there's a lot of material out there. As I said, I'm Alasdair Mac Roibeirt. This class will be taught, or it will be made available afterwards. And if there's anyone that didn't hear me earlier, this is recorded. They will be posted after the fact. So if you want to reference back to it, and as will my contact information if you have any questions that are not answered in the class. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. So first off, playing in the SCA, obviously, we are interested in historical. We are emulating people of a bygone era. And that usually means a lot of different facets, bits of personalities, bits of clothing, food, armor, how they lived, what they did. Most people, garb, clothing is the first thing that they really get into, and is, obviously the first need you have to hit most any event. For a lot of indoor events, some feast gear, some garb, you're good to go. Once you get to outdoor events or the longer weekend events, one of the first things that a lot of people look to is, okay, well, I want to have somewhere to sit. There's not always a place to sit down, or if it is, it's not comfortable for whatever reason, too high, too short, too narrow, too wide, whatever the case may be. So people start looking around for seating, and one of the quickest, cheapest, easiest ways to do is to go for a bag chair. You find them at just about any sporting goods, any big stores. You can find them at Walmart. During summer months, you can find them at grocery stores on occasion. They're quick, they're easy, they break down really small. You can pick them up and move them from place to place, but they stick out a lot. They also aren't particularly durable. If you're lucky, some people, they'll last years and years. Others, you find they break after a season. They get banged up. They're an option. They are usable, but by no means do they really contribute to the medieval aesthetic that we're going for. But it is an option. There's a couple of different styles. Some of them have arms, some of them don't. Some of them have pop-up tray tables. There's little things you can do to try and make them a little bit more, a little less jarring. So you can see here, some people go to great lengths. You can make a cover that goes over it and put your heraldry on it, use some nice fabric to disguise it a bit, make it so it doesn't jump out quite as much. If you want to, accentuate with fur, I don't know about the cat. They're a little harder to control at events. And, a lot of people, as Rosie pointed out, you can throw a blanket over a cloak over it, and it does disguise it a bit. But it does tend to still break up that medieval sightline a little bit. But it is a heck of a lot better than just seeing, that screaming nylon and tube steel chair sitting right there. So when you decide it's time to actually make something, to expand your encampment, maybe to make something that doesn't stick out quite so much. For a lot of people, they don't have a lot of tools to begin with. It is whatever you happen to have around the house. And this isn't something that you're going to go out and spend thousands and thousands of dollars on to make a chair. So, it's trying to keep ideas that are going to be reasonably priced, but also not be super complicated or super cumbersome. And a lot of people turn into these here, which have been termed the stargazer chair or a bog chair. They're really super simple. Usually 2x10 or a 2x12 from your local hardware store, cutting a couple holes, cutting a couple notches on it. You can do it with hand tools, and it is not terribly difficult. They don't stick out as much as a plastic chair does. They fit in a little bit more. They break down and they're easy to transport. They're also not period in the least. I have heard Some people say that you found evidence of African chairs going back a long time in their period for that. Personally, the farthest back I have been able to date this type of seating is it's a Boy Scout project for basic woodworking skills, but it's a perfectly serviceable chair. It is something that you can take with you, you can break down, and the nice thing is for usually maybe 20 bucks, you've got a chair and it's something you've made yourself, and it's a launching point to move into more period style seatings and to, you know, you upgraded your camp yourself and you look at that and say, hey, I did that, which is always a big thing with most of us anyway. So the kind of the next step up is what's been termed the Leopold bench. This is something I've seen in about the past 10 years or so. And again, this is by no means a period seating choice. It is usually they're not break down. You can find a lot of them, and if you look for Leopold bench, you'll find them all over the internet. They're really easy to go together. Again, it's not a huge material investment, and it is easily doable by most people with some pretty simple stuff around the tools around the house. You're looking at dimensional lumber, you're looking at some 2x6s, some dowels, and a 2x12 for the seat. For about 50 bucks, you can make two of them. Um, it does take a bit more work. You're doing a lot more of the mortise and tenon joints. The tabs are sticking through the slots, and having some a little bit better basic tools does help out with this. Um, with my setup and when I've taught classes on these, usually people can walk away with a completed chair in less than a full day's work, a completed bench anyway. They're nice, they break down pretty much to just flat stock. Uh, Usually around 4 to 5 feet long, depending on how long you're going to make them. And they fit easily in most compact cars. You can also adjust it to your particular needs a bit, making it a little wider, making it a little narrower. You can turn it into a single person chair if you want to. The leg that is a permanently fixed piece. So that one makes it a little bit awkward to get in and out of the car. But it is, again, it doesn't look quite so mundane and jarring. It blends into the background a little bit. Not period, but really helpful. Now, this is obviously beyond most of what a lot of people are going to want to do. It is in no way, shape, or form a period look. This is more of a breakdown couch. It kind of takes the Leopold bench and kicks it up a notch. I've seen a few of these scattered around on tier over the past decade or so since I've been here. And about 2 years ago, I was asked to build one, so I went ahead and built it. And it's kind of an interesting crossover between a totally period, totally mundane. It's not really any one thing. It just kind of fills a bit of a niche. And for those that want something a little bit more solid than one of the Leopold benches, and they need something for the backrest, or people who like to just kind of lounge around. It's a nice wide platform. Again, it breaks down pretty well. I don't think I have any pictures of that, unfortunately. Um, and it's, again, all box store lumber. You're looking at some 2x4s, some 2x6s, and a part of a sheet of plywood, and then some dowels. So it's something that most people with a little bit of work and a weekend can figure out how to put together. This particular one, you can even see where the screws are. After I made that one, I kind of looked at that and cringed a little bit and transferred my screws on the inside so they weren't quite so noticeable. But it's an option, probably not for everyone, probably not for most people, but you might see them. So now we get into period seating. And again, I'm kind of going from easiest to most difficult. And in this case, we've got a stool is about the most simple constructed seat that you can come across. Three-legged seem to be pretty common. You do see four-legged as well. I like three-legged because in a lot of the events that we go to, especially outdoor events, it's not always level or even remotely level seating. And with a three-legged stool, you have that tripod effect. So you're always going to find a stable platform to sit on. You're not rocking back and forth or worried about your chair breaking under you or anything like that. This particular one is called the Lund stool. It is dated to the 11th century. It is it's out of Sweden. Conjecture is it's possibly a milking stool. it's really kind of hard to say. As you can see from the picture on the top there, it is all they really found was the seat board. They didn't find the legs for whatever reason. So how tall it actually was, if the legs were splayed or if they were straight up, is not really known. Most conjecture seems to say that they were probably splayed out for greater stability, but we don't really know for certain. You can take educated guesses, but it's kind of the name of the game with the SCA is all about educated guesses and what things were and how they might have worked. So this is again a really simple one. It is a small length of flat stock. You can pick up a 2x10 or a 2x12, knock off a foot or so, and you can get some good sized dowels, maybe a 1-inch dowel, maybe an inch and a quarter, some closet rod, drill a few holes, and you have a stable seat, a little bit of glue, and you're off. You're good to go. It's small, it's lightweight, it doesn't break down, which is one of the few drawbacks for what we do, and space is often at a premium. Trying to fit this in the back of the car might be a little bit more difficult, but you can also usually pack around it pretty well. And for a small investment in time and money, you can have a dozen period seating options scattered around your camp and have plenty of room for yourself, your campmates, and any guests that might drop by. From there, we go a little bit more complicated. The basic stool, we don't know how long, but I mean, it's pretty simple. So the likelihood of it being around is for a pretty long time. Just see. Jason comments, you could cone the tip of the legs to make it a bit more. You could. The biggest thing is anything like that where weight holds the seat together makes it more difficult to move and also has a greater chance of instability. If you're getting up and a belt catches on the top of the seat, pulls the whole thing, and then it collapses all over the place. You got to pick it up and put it back together again. And it's certainly an option. If you have the capability of creating a conical hole going into the board, as well as tapering the legs evenly to do so, by all means, it is entirely possible to do it. For that matter, you could also look into getting a wooden screw cutter, and you could actually thread the holes and thread the top of your dowels to make legs that screw in and out. That's more specialized, however. Not as many people are going to have access to those tools. So I lump this as the easy beginning kind of chair to get things going. Just about anything, you can make it as extravagant and as decorative as you want to go. So it's really a question of how far you want to take it. So with this next one here, we're sticking with stools, but we're going into folding stools. And folding stools go back quite a ways. We can actually find depictions of simple folding stools as far back as Egyptian hieroglyphics in the pyramids. So they've been around for a very long time, and yet we still find them around today. The basic form and function has not changed, and they make really, really good, easily transportable seating for beside the list field, or if you just happen to day trip somewhere and you want something small and simple. The ones that you can see in this picture here are by no means small. The top one is a reproduction from Dover Castle, dated to the 12th century, and the bottom one is Austrian, 1243. You can see a lot of detail went into these. When you get right down to the construction, though, you're basically looking at two rectangular frames, and one fits inside the other. They have a stretcher at the top and the bottom to keep them rectangular and rigid, and then they're pinned together in the middle. Whether you're using a bolt, if you're using a dowel, whatever works for you, whatever you're comfortable with. When I have made them, I tend to use a bolt and a nut, usually a nylon lock washer, so that the nut doesn't work its way loose. And then I'll put a decorative piece over that washer or that bolt, so you don't see it from the outside. Some decorative fabric, some decorative leather for the seat, and you're good to go. It's kind of a step up from a Lund stool and that's a little bit more work, but it also packs a lot smaller. And as you can see from these examples, you can go incredibly extravagant with these. You can make them absolutely gorgeous if you want to put the time and money into it. Try your hand at carving. They're a small project. They're relatively compact so that it's not a long, drawn-out affair. And if you do mess up a part, it's not terribly difficult to replicate that part and try again. So these are a really good one for a lot of people to start with and kind of get their hands dirty with something a little bit more complicated. Then we move on to a slightly different style of folding stool here. These are a very similar idea, but there's a lot more joinery involved, a lot more complicated joints. These are more akin to some of the chairs that we'll discuss later on. If you look at the actual stool, the seat is a solid seat. It is, instead of being hinged in the center like the folding stools that we previously looked at are, these are actually folded in, they have 4 different articulating points. They've got a pivot right in the middle that the legs scissor on, and then the seat is composed of interlocking slats that fit in between the individual legs, and those are also pivoted both in the center and then they're pivoted on the ends where they're locked into the frame. You see quite a few of these, again, pretty common. They break down, they're a little bulkier than a folding stool that we just saw was. We've got a solid seat, and that goes up, so it becomes a little bit taller than a fabric or leather seat would. You go to the next one. You can see here these are reproductions that I've personally done, some slightly different. The one on the right is a little bit more in keeping with the illuminations that we've just seen. And it is more complicated than a basic pair of frames that fit inside each other. And it looks like it's a lot more work, but really it is more just about basic repetition. You're looking at, for the one on the right anyway, you're looking at straight rectangular boards. There's not a whole lot of fancy cutting involved. There's not as much fancy joinery. We do get into some joinery here. We're looking at the legs, the feet, and the arms are attached to the legs with a mortise and tenon joint. And if you're not familiar with that one, basically think tab and slot. A tenon is a tab that will stick out of the end of your board. It's usually smaller and a little narrower than the full length of your board. And then a mortise is a hole, like a square hole. Again, tab and slot. You put the mortise, you put the tenon into the mortise, and then in this case, glue and or peg them in place to make a nice, solid, sturdy joint. So that one's a little bit more complicated, but every piece that is on there, you're setting up for effectively 3 operations. All 4 pieces, the 2 arms and the 2 feet, are cut exactly the same way. They have mortises in the exact same spots. It's just a question of flipping them around when you put them together. And then the legs, the holes are all in exactly the same spot. These are, it's a nice step up. They're a little bit more work, but they are phenomenally more interesting to look at. There are just so many more angles to it, and you can do a lot with them. You can, if you look at the difference between the left and the right, you can see the right has got some slightly, the left has got some slightly more, a little bit more detail to the arms. It's got the rounded over piece, so the hand is a little bit bigger and a little bit more comfortable. I have seen people take these and extend them out and put a back on them. So they're a nice stepping off from a simple stool into a more complicated chair. And but they've been around for quite a while too. So we're going to take kind of a lateral step here, and going from a single person seat, we're looking at benches, something capable of multiple people. If you look in the lower right hand corner here, you'll see that there are a couple of gentlemen, probably of ecclesiastical bent by their garb, sitting on a bench. In this particular case, it's shown as a slab seat with just a couple of slab upright legs, which is about as simple as you can get for a multi-person. One thing with this one, I would suspect that this bench actually has 3 legs to it. If you look, you'll notice that there is a leg behind the gentleman in the blue coat and the red hose, and then one right in between the two people sitting on it. The gentleman in the pleated black gown on the far right, I suspect, is hiding the third leg. I don't see a whole lot of three-legged benches, but the reason I say this is I've had occasion to make benches myself. You'll actually see a picture of that coming up here in the next one. Well, not that one. One more, if you would. I'm a little out of order between my presentation. Back one. If you look at the bottom picture here, you'll see that it's a two-legged bench. This one's meant to break down. This particular one there, we invented a game at Ontario West War about 2 years back that we started calling the Buttapult, because we had the children with us and they were sitting on the bench, and when one of the children would sit down too far to the end, the bench would tip. The amount of overhang that was so far over that the center of gravity was wrong and you would fall pretty easily. You go back up to the illumination. So if you look at this one here again and how close to the seat edge that one leg is behind the red hose versus how much is sticking out into space, the guy in the blue would be in great danger of falling. And you really don't want to embarrass your ecclesiastical guests by having them slide off a bench on the butt of the ground. Just doesn't really do good things. Next slide. So this is a 15th century bench. It is much more elaborately carved than obviously the one previously or the one that I did later on. And it is also looks like it is possible that it breaks down. If you look, you can see where the top of the bench, there are 4 rectangles that run perpendicular to the length of the bench in the top, which are the tenons coming up through the mortise slots in the bench from the legs, and those hold those in place. And then there are a couple of stretchers that slot into the legs, as well as a stretcher on the bottom. And the one on the bottom, if you look near the base where that cutout V is, you can see that there's a small spot where the tenon for that bottom stretcher is sticking through. So theoretically, this one you could pull it apart. You could take it into pieces and go from place to place with it. The really elaborate part comes in that the stretcher has got both the decorative cutouts on the outside edge supporting the outer edge of the thing, as well as a whole lot of really elaborate tracery and Gothic work in the actual stretcher itself. It weakens it a little bit, but most of the weight of the chair is going to be supported by the legs. So you can go ahead and you can be a little bit more ornate with that one. Might be a little bit beyond most people's first or second attempts. I've made a few of these. I'm not sure I'm quite ready to try this one yet. And if you don't want it to break down, simple application of a little bit of glue and you've got a very fancy, nice, sturdy, solid bench. It's just, it's kind of a step up. It's also a little bit later in period for, going with your camp aesthetics. Right? Here you can see a couple again. The bottom bench it's a breakdown, as you can see from the pegs. I did a little bit of cutting out with it. I don't have the stretchers in it. This is a more simple bench. It is intended to break down. You can see the legs are mortised through the seat again. When I make these now, I don't have nearly that same amount of overhang on the sides. I've usually got about 3 to 4 inches on them to keep people from flying off. It's humorous, but not that humorous. The pictures above show a really, really simple bench. This one was commissioned of me. It was basically they wanted something really, really sturdy, really, really rustic looking. So I literally went out to a section of alder that I had sitting in my yard, and I split off a big chunk of it, and I drilled some holes through it, turned some legs, and stuck them in there. It's not particularly pretty. It's heavy as all get out. It does not break down at all. You could probably use it to break down small doors if you really needed to, but it's again, it's a simple bench that almost anyone would find that they could put that together with no problems in a couple hours worth of work. A little bit of a finish on it, you're good to go. So One of the things that we find a lot in the SCA is the need to dual or multi-purpose. Having just a chair in a small vehicle takes up a lot of space. If you can find something that is going to do double duty, makes it so much easier. A lot of things that you find in you find a lot of conjecture, especially in the Norse and the Viking, for bench boxes. People would have a bench that they would sit on and row on the longships. That was also a box that they kept their personal possessions and goods in. And that is something that we've transferred over to the SCA an awful lot. And while we don't really see so many of them in the manuscripts, you do see people sitting on benches or on boxes from time to time. It's not particularly common. When you see a lot of the benches or a lot of the boxes will have decorative strap work on the top. They will have peaked lids, things that would just make it difficult or downright impossible to sit on. But then you see ones like this one here, where the corners are a little bit rounded, the lid. The box top is completely flat, and the height of it looks like it's about a perfect height to sit on. So for what we do, this makes perfect sense to have and use. And it also gives you a couple of different options. You can store things in it. You can sit on it. You can stand on it when you need to change the candles. This particular one has got a lot of carving on it. It's a pretty ornate piece on it. You can see it's got a lock plate in the front, carved in the shape of a heart, and then it's got all of the arches and carvings in it. But when you get right down to it, it's a pretty simple box. Um, it's got a frame and style construction. If you look at the front, you'll see there's a couple of spots on it where dowels are sticking out where the panels have come into it. It's something that is most people can put together a version like this or even a simpler version that doesn't need to have the all of the carving to it or even that fancy of a construction. A simple 6-board box is a good starting project for people who are looking at getting into woodworking and who have not done a whole lot of it. Again, very, very easy to do with most household tools that people have just on hand already. You don't have to go buy anything. Um, and something like this one here, this is a 6-board box. It still serves the same function. It's a box. You can sit on it. You've now made something to store your gear in and something to sit on. It's a really plain box. It is roughly based off of a number of examples. We have seen this style of construction in quite a few surviving boxes. If you angle the legs in and you angle the top in so that you get more of a truncated um, pyramidal shape, you end up more with the style similar to what you find in the Mastemere fine, which different dimensions, obviously, but the construction is about the same. So it's a nice gateway project for a couple of different areas depending on where you want to go. Um, then we go back to benches again, except here we're going to go into something a little bit more elaborate. This is a bench. It is in Sweden. It's actually in the Historica Museet, I believe. We actually went there last year, and I got a chance to see this in person, and absolutely phenomenal. A lot of intricate carvings, a lot of very skilled work. But if you break it down to the basics, it is something that a lot of people could do as well. Um, you need to know something about mortars and tenons. You need to know something about doweled and pegged construction. This one, they're not entirely certain how old it is. It was found in a church attic, if I remember correctly, and one of those things that it had been there forever. And if you look closely at the front, you'll see that the on the right-hand picture that the legs in the front don't match, probably indicating at some point in time that there was some notable reconstruction done from damage. If you hunt around for this bench online, you'll find there's actually pictures of people fairly recently, within the last 100 years, sitting on it before it became a museum piece, and it was just really fascinating. Yeah, in the background of the picture here, over my right shoulder, you actually can see a chair that I constructed last year for Mistress Disa's elevation, and after that, several more, which was based off of this particular bench. It was one Baron Dunstan actually turned me on to this bench when I was looking for options, needing something that had a good solid seat, a good solid back, and armrests in a chair for a little bit earlier period. There's not a whole lot that we've got there. And the few that we do have don't usually have arms. So this is kind of one of those history meets the SCA. It's not a truly period seat, but the one in the background, obviously not the one on your screen. But it is a adaptation to kind of fit our needs with a more period aesthetic. Um, This is also a bench. This is a slightly different style of bench. This is it's known as a swing back settle. And this is one that comes in much later in period. You're looking at 14th to 15th century at the earliest that I have seen them. If you look closely in the illumination here, you'll see it, and it's got a very simple back. It's got a bar. But if you look to the sides of the bench, it actually has arms and a pivot point so that you can lift that bar up and move it to the other side. So that if you're sitting, in this particular case, at the table, enjoying a meal with your fellows, and if you look closely to the left of the chair, you'll notice that there's a multi-legged folding stool just off of the gentleman with the red elbow. And then after the meal, you can get up, move around to the other side, swing the settle arm to the back side, and now you're facing the other direction. So it's an interesting one, but it is very bulky. Even more so than the back bench, it's bulky, but it is also somewhat fragile with that particular arm on there. Um, you This is a reproduction done by the St. Thomas Guild, and if you are a woodworker or an aspiring woodworker and you have not discovered the St. Thomas Guild, let me say you're welcome. Go check them out. They are a phenomenal resource on all types of construction for just about every aspect of what we do in the SCA. This one's got a pretty strong back to it and a lot more carving and a lot more embellishment than the previous one did. But again, there's a lot of void space in there. So to take something like that to an event, you would need either a particularly large vehicle or you're going to be packing around it a lot, filling in all the nooks and crannies and things like that. But it's a beautiful piece, and I plan on making one at some point in time, just not quite yet. Now we start talking about chairs again. This is a really interesting piece, not something most people were going to do. I include it just because it's always fascinated me. This is titled The Throne of Dagobert. It is believed to have been created in the 8th century. It is a bronze stool originally. The four legs with the animal head top, from that down is believed to be the original stool. And if you look closely at the center rondel between the legs, you will notice that the legs on the bottom go down and there's a pin in place that's showing on the outside of the leg and slots. So this chair actually folded, but unlike most of the previous ones where it formed an X and they would fold like this chair actually folded in together, more like a modern camp chair, like one of the Coleman style chairs. It is thought in the 11th century they decided to pretty it up a bit, and the back and the arms with the filigree to it were added in, thus making it more difficult to close. I haven't gotten a whole lot of chance to research it. If you look closely at the back of the chair where the arm joins the back, you'll notice it would look to be hinges. So it's entirely possible that those decorative knobs, the head-shaped knobs on there, pull out and the back comes off completely and it still folds. But it's not something I've been able to track down a whole lot of. It is not a traditional X chair or stool. There is kind of that whole family of the X chairs, both the folding stools, fold stools, Dantesca chairs, we'll discuss later on, Serenvalto or Sabrinola, depending on where you're looking at. Um, it has that characteristic X in front, but it doesn't close the same way. So it's kind of a unique beast in and of itself, but it is really fascinating to look at. Probably not something I'll tackle, just it being made out of bronze, and I'm a woodworker. But, so as I said, here we get into the Dantesca chairs. Dantesca chairs, and by extension later the Serenvalta chairs, are X chairs, meaning if you look at them from the front, they form an X shape, and that is how they close. They pivot on that center rondel. They are most definitely documentable to later period, 15th, 16th century, especially for Italian or German cultures. There are some that have been seen as far as Spanish cultures, and some that are seen occasionally in English and that that portion, England, Scotland, Ireland, France, all of those areas. You'll see them in some of the illumination and manuscript. Um, um, the question that was posted here for the bronze one, the Throne of Dagobert, should be listed in the handout. It's there's not a whole lot on it, and it's not something I've done extensive research in. Like I said, it's bronze, which is not something I've worked with. But if you just do a search for the term Throne of Dagobert, you should find it pretty easy on the internet. It pops up pretty well. Um, as I was saying, so the Dantesca it's a little harder to document as far as when they started. They just kind of seem to explode on the scene. And this is actually the first style of chair that I ever built. Back in 2005, I was in the Army and I had gotten back from deployment. I got a bonus, and I went out and I said, I want to get back into woodworking. I've done other stuff. I want a chair. So I spent some money on some tools that, in retrospect, I wish I'd bought better quality tools. And I used the plans that I found on a website called Spiffing Up Your Campsite, which is also linked in the handout farther on. But a gentleman by the name of Master Charles Oakley put it together, and it pretty much chronicles a bunch of projects that he and his household did to beautify their camp. And this is one of them. Um, it does fold. It is still somewhat bulky. It is not as bulky as, say, a bench or a settle, but it is definitely not as convenient to travel with as, say, one of the folding stools. But it does have a back, which is a really nice thing. I've made several dozen of these at this point. They have been used in my camp. They have been gifted. They have been used for baronial thrones on occasion. They're a really nice mid-range chair. Um, you can make them out of pretty inexpensive lumber. If you look at the one, both of these have very narrow arms. They are about the same thickness as the legs of the chair, probably an inch and a half at a guess. Um, the legs, when I make them, are cut out of a single board. I have actually found that for most people, cutting them out of a 2x6, you can get sufficient lumber to make one chair out of a pair of 8-foot 2x6s. If you're making the arms the same way, you might want to get a pair of 10-foot 2x6s, and then everything is assembled. You're cutting it out, the scissor joint in the center, they're not scissor joint, it's a half lap joint. The rondel that's in that middle section there, all four of the legs are cut identically, and then one half of that circular section is removed so that when you then flip one of the legs over, they fit together, and each one has half the thickness of the leg so that they actually can pivot on each other and in that circular area and close. I also use a stainless steel bolt through the middle of it to give it a little bit more strength. And then I will put a decorative piece of wood on the outside and also on the inside, rotated 90 degrees to the grain. And that helps to strengthen that joint. It does make it a kind of a weaker point of the chair. If you're using a good hardwood, oak, walnut, maple, anything along those lines, it's going to be a lot stronger. But if you're going for a less expensive route, like fir, dimensional lumber, you can buy the lumber to make this chair for under $50. And that's the lumber, the hardware, usually the glue, and if you're thrifty, also the fabric for it. The chair on the right is actually a fabric back. It is an upholstery velvet or an upholstery fabric, and the chair on the left is actually leather. One of the things that I have personally found, neither of these actually do it, but a number of other depictions I have found show that inside the chair, the back actually forms a channel. So it not only wraps around the back side of the chair, but it also has a piece of fabric that is attached to the inside of that arm so that it's not pushing directly away from the back of the chair. It helps to make it secure and not as likely to pop off. And you can see both of these here are just phenomenally decorated. These are more than likely an inlay. I don't have information on these particular ones as well, or specifically. It is possible it's paint. It's a little hard to tell with some of these ones. There are some odd wear patterns on here. If you look down near the feet on the chair, as well as the back, and on top of the armrest where they received a lot of, of friction and contact over the years. Again, it's a question of how much people want to put into it and, what your skills are. They are seen in quite a few different illuminations at various different upper class depictions of people. These are a couple of fairly simple modern reproductions that I've done. If you look really closely in the open chair on the left, both of them, you can see that there's that flap of fabric on the inside attached to the arms. I also use 4x6s to cut my arms out as opposed to using the 2x material, just because I like a wider armrest. And also, it's really kind of convenient to have somewhere to put down your cup when you're sitting talking to people, and have it on hand as opposed to down by your feet where you get up and kick it and knock it over. I also have modified mine a little bit. You do see some depictions of ones that don't have that stretcher foot that the previous picture had. It's a little easier to find a good solid surface for these at a rocky event site as opposed to having just a solid bar that's 16 inches long that you're going to rock and round on. So, go ahead. So the Savranola chair is very similar in construction to the Dantesca chair. Again, it's an X chair. It is scissors in the middle, but here, and as we talked about a little bit earlier with the folding stool, you can see the seat is a solid seat. The backs on these slot into place. They're a little bit more cumbersome. They're a lot heavier than a Dantesca chair. You've got all that wood, but they're also a lot sturdier. Again, you've got all that wood. You're not looking at fabric that can tear or get damaged by the sun. So it makes for a sturdier chair to work with. However, you've got a lot more pieces to work with. If you're looking at these, you're looking at 18, 20, maybe 24 legs. And same with the seats. And there's a lot more moving pieces in there to, if you're off by a little bit. You're off by a 32nd of an inch over 16 pieces, you're off by a good margin by the time you hit the end of it, and now your chair doesn't fold correctly. And they can also be more difficult to finish. Trying to paint in between all of those is difficult, and you have to be careful if you try and finish it before you assemble the chair and not get glue in where your joints or anything like that. But again, you can see the one on the right, very plain, not a whole lot of decoration. It looks like possibly a coat of arms or maybe a guild crest of some sort in the back. The one on the left, very intricately decorated. Whether it's painted or inlaid, it's a little hard to tell. Unlike the Dantesca chair from the last slide, this one doesn't have the same level of wear on it. It would have shown us. Some of them are documented as having mother of pearl inlaid to them, or fancy, other more expensive cuts of wood on them. But I haven't made a whole lot of them with all of those legs. It makes it heavy and bulky, but they are an option and they're a really nice chair to go with. These are some modern reproductions. You can see here, unlike the Dantesca chair, the legs are shaped a little bit differently. Can you go back one? On these, you see these are very serpentine. They make several different radiuses as they go from top to bottom, and it gives you a kind of distinctive look. And they kind of follow the same number of curves on both of these chairs, even though the one on the right has a much higher and somewhat narrower seat uh, than the one on the left. Go ahead and go forward. And then here, it's a slightly simplified version. You've only got a couple of curves on there. Makes it a little easier to keep uniformity. If a little bit off, a little bit off, a little bit off on the legs. And when you look down, it's very notable since they're all in series with each other. So keeping the pattern simple makes it a lot easier. Again, the other downside to this is the back is not attached. So when you want to pick it up and move it, unlike a Dantesca chair with leather or the cloth that just folds up with the chair, you've now got two pieces to move. But it's a pretty chair, and it's a really nice one to have around for a little bit extra, oomph in the camp. This is one that I've discovered fairly recently, cat's not included. This is a 16th century Spanish friar's chair. And this is one that is a fairly technical chair to do, mainly just in needing to figure out where the hinges go. It is an actual folding chair. The picture on the right is a depiction of the chair in a magazine. There are a couple of different versions of it, excuse me, in a museum, not a magazine, that some of them fold and some of them don't. Some of them appear to collapse in that some of the pictures I've seen, the front and back lower stretcher are not hinged in place, but there are pegs off to the sides to make it look like they're possibly pinned and they close. If you look at the one on the left, that is just the bare framework, and you can see pretty clearly that there are hinges on the front of the stretcher. The thing that makes this chair work to close is that the stretchers are offset. The one in the front is taller, and the one in the back is lower on the chair. Then they're hinged to the chair arms or to the chair legs and will open up. Um, for my personal construction, I actually ended up putting a couple of latches on it to keep it locked in place. The lines of this chair, if you'll notice, are really similar to a modern dinner chair. At any of your dinner tables, you might look, you'll notice that your chair backs has a bit of a slant like that. You've got an arm. It's also very similar to a Coleman folding chair. In fact, they fold in the same way. But this is for the people that like those dimensions, for the people that like those, that aesthetic, it's a period chair. One thing that I learned after the fact making these, they are somewhat difficult to get to articulate properly. You need the hinges to be perfectly square to one another on both of them. And as pictured there, with the one on the left, when I built that and put a leather seat and a leather back on it, the weight caused the top of the chair to bend inward, putting a lot of pressure on the hinges. What I didn't find till later is that there was actually a bar in the chair as well behind the seat back. It runs between the uprights, and it is a curved metal rod that will also unlatch and hang down so you can close the chair up. I constructed the third one of these chairs, and I was delivering it at Sport of Kings a few years back, and I happened to bump into a Laurel from the Kingdom of Adenvelt, Mistress Angela, who was the first person I know that ever made one of these. And this was years ago, mid to late 90s, and I constructed the chair off of a picture that I was shown and made one. And it wasn't until I bumped into her that it dawned on me that this was the chair that she had made. And we got to talking about it, and she passed on some references and mentioned, well, yeah, I know about that problem. Here's the thing. None of the pictures in any of these museums. There are a couple of these in the Metropolitan Museum of Art that you can look up. If you look for folding Spanish chairs or folding friar's chairs, you'll bring up some online, but none of them show the back. So they don't show that bar. and it's not something that really jumps out. But once I put that bar in, it was just like, oh, this is so much easier. It takes all the strain off of the hardware, and it makes it makes so much sense. One of those little details, you just don't know or think about. So, but it's again, it is a Spanish chair. I have only found it referenced as a Spanish chair or a Spanish friar's chair. I have never seen it anywhere else. So, so as I mentioned earlier, when we were looking for a Scandinavian chair, trying to find something that would work for an elevation and would provide armrests and a solid seat and a good back support was difficult. I did come across these, and the box chair coming out of Scandinavia there's a few different examples. This is a 13th century one. I believe the Oseberg ship also had a box chair in it, and this it's a box. It's a square box with effectively three sides, and then the front is gone. Um, these if you look really closely on some of them, and on this particular one, if you look on the side of it, you can see a line of dots right underneath where the arm connects, and they're actually, a number of them are a woven seat, like kind of like a net that provides the support. So there's not a whole lot of them that have survived. They tend to be very thin and they rot away. This one again, you can see at the bottom of the leg sticking out, there are tenons sticking out of the legs. So we see how it's kind of construction. There's a lot of pins and things in here. It is not as complicated joinery wise, um, but trying to get it nice and clean. And again, it's a big, heavy box, and you can't put anything in it. So this is not one that I usually see much of for camp seating, and it's not one that I would really do for camp seating personally. It just doesn't have the same flexibility as a lot of the other ones do. Now we come to the last one, your hall chairs. I'm sure there are other terms and names for them. These are the big, imposing, very late period chairs you see, usually 15th and 16th onward, usually pretty ornately carved, and they're just big, monstrous, imposing things. These are really good for things like, thrones. Um, if you build them historically, if you look closely, you'll notice there's a latch on the front of this chair on the left here, and it's again, it's basically the outgrowth of a bench box. You can put things inside it. It's a bench. There's space in there. You can store things in your chair. Of course, it's got that big, bulky back to it, so now you move that around. The picture on the right are the current thrones for the Kingdom of Antir. They do not have that bench, that box under the seat for storage and things. These are actually meant to break down. They do convey a fairly similar aesthetic, but they're also built with modern bed hardware to allow it to be break down and pack flat. The hall chairs, one of the defining characteristics to them is the carving on the back of the chair and on the front and the sides, the called linen fold carving. And it's a repetitive motif that you see a lot of. It doesn't have as much of the Gothic tracery and the embellishment as some, but it's a nice repetitive pattern that once you get it down, I'm told, I have yet to do that, is fairly easy to knock out, and it can cover a large section of time or a large section of space without having all of the time taken up into putting in all those little bits of trace work and such. Um, but it's again, it's a nice chair, but unless you've got either a large trailer or a big camp or a horde of minions to set it up for you, it's probably not really practical for taking with you to events and all that. So these are kind of just some of an overview of the more common seating that I've seen. I'm sure you've seen others. There are the plywood thrones that people construct, and they peg together and they go together pretty quickly and easily. These are just some other options and kind of a wide view of things that most people can make at home. in the handout are also a couple of links to a couple of different sites. The St. Thomas Guild is one of them. My blog is another that has a few construction projects that I've done, as well as I believe House Grey Dragon is in there, and spiffing up your campsite. So those are some that for the people who are actually looking at building some of the things, there are some really good resources in there. Question asked, what's your favorite type to make? It depends on what I've made the most recently. Um, to be perfectly honest, seating is kind of one of my things. I like chairs. I like seeing what's out there. Um, the the awe factor from a Dantesca chair is really cool. It's people look at it and go, "Oh man, I could never make one of those." I mean, that's just it's too difficult. I wouldn't even know where to begin. But the spiffing up your website had some really good plans to kind of get in there, and I have taken people who are pretty much complete novices to woodworking, and they've built chairs with a little bit of instruction. It's a matter of breaking it down. Um, but then again, the folding chairs, the folding stools are actually really nice because they go together quickly. They are there's a lot of little parts, but it's not super intricate, so it kind of gives you a sense of completion really quickly. So, um, my favorite kind of chair, it varies a whole lot. I like all of them. You talk about which chairs are comfortable or can be made more comfortable. Obviously, cushions help, but the basic shape being comfortable. No. Um, Personally, I find Dantesca chairs to be incredibly comfortable. It is a canvas seat, it's a canvas back, it conforms to you, but that is me personally. Your taste may vary. I like the folding stools, but personally, I sit in them very strange. I don't sit flat in them most of the time. I actually kick up the folding stools onto the front leg and then put my legs out in front of me so that you are, effectively, I'm most of my weight is pushing into the chair. So it's really what works for you, your body style, your body type. Um, Dantescas are going to be a lot more forgiving, but if you have back problems, go for something with a solid back. It's really try them out. That's the other thing. Most people that have camp furniture are more than happy to talk to you about it, especially if they've made it themselves. And I'm pretty sure that if you wandered up and expressed interest, they'd be happy to let you try it and you could see. Next question. One we've been looking at is like that last one with a pair of wheels on the back, a Gothic arch shaped back, and a hand hold cutout. Works like a rolling suitcase. Um, okay. I have not seen something like that. I have seen the Leopold bench that I talked about earlier that somebody had shrunk down a bit, made it a little bit narrower, and was a handhold cut into the back of it and wheels. So yeah, you could just peg it together and then roll it around with you. Matthew asks, what about other types of camp furniture? There's lots. If you need furniture in camp, you need a bed, you need a table, you need all kinds of stuff. There's tons of stuff if you have a need. However, this class was specifically aimed at seating. So there may be more classes down the road with other types. We'll talk about tables, talk about beds. I've made a few of both of those. So Peter asked, what wood would the Dantesca chair be made of? There's not like a specific wood. It is usually regional. You see a lot of them are made out of darker woods. It's going to be what your person had on hand, your craftsman had on hand. Personally, I have made them a lot out of fir because when I make them and sell them, I'm trying to keep the cost down. And so I don't go crazy. I've made them out of walnut, and I have also made them out of maple. So I would say research what kind of stuff would be made in your particular time period and go for it. And if that is not something you can do, then go by what you can afford. The conspicuous consumption. Which chair is your go-to chair for your camp? All of them. In my camp, I had a Dantesca chair for a number of years, and I had a fold stool. And then when my children started coming to event with me more, I made a couple of benches, and then I made a couple of more. And then when Mistress Jisa joined me, when she was elevated, I ended up making the bench that we turned into a chair. So my camp has a huge smattering of different kind of chairs. My personal favorite chair is I like Dantesca chairs. We just made new ones to so that we have matching chairs there. And my last one is coming on 8 years old, I think, and it's been thrown around in the back of the trailer and beat up a good bit. Uh, let's see, the manuscript image for the swingback settle looks like it might have two metal straps on the back. Is it possible those might be hinges to use it for storage? Um, possibly. I'm not really sure. It's like I said, I've looked at it in passing. The settles don't seem to be something that travels quite as much. But again, this is where we can kind of bring in that creative part of the name. And if that's a way that works for you to do so, then you can, by all means, make it so. Do it so you can take it along with you. Love a class on breakdown beds. Well, I have Mr. Stisa, the my lovely technical associate here, who has been running these things, and I'm fairly certain she would be happy to arrange such a class at some point down the road. Next question. Some Dantesca chairs look very curvy, so much bigger than 2x6, 2x12. Um, it's possible. I have seen some conjecture that they might not have actually been cut out of a single board. They might have been bent. I've done some bending wood myself, and I'm not really sure that that would be as likely. Springback is difficult to control, but it is entirely possible. And you also got to remember that we don't have the same access to lumber that our ancestors did. They had a lot more access to large, old growth trees, and they would get much wider. They also had a lot more access to being able to specifically find trees that would work for what they needed. So being able to go out and find, well, this particular tree does this, so I'm going to take that one. For the Dantesca and the Serenvalta, I don't know. Most of them that you see, it's not like I can get up close enough to look at the grain and say, oh, the grain follows the line of this completely, so it must have been bent. Um, it really goes what aesthetic you're looking for. Let's see. I use storage boxes and benches for guests. Then, if we don't have guests, we have a great place to store stuff. I got tired of hauling around chairs for guests. I like to have people around. I like to preen. I like to show off. I like to have a really, really big camp. And, for the two of us and or children when they show up, we have a 20 by 30 tent. Half of that becomes a porch. So, but in our camp, if you wander up, you're likely to find benches. You're likely to find bench boxes. They're especially great around the fire pit because we can throw s'mores stuff in it and, at night pull out the s'mores. Um, but yeah, it's the bench boxes are nice. Like I said, you're not bringing a single use thing. It's a multi-purpose, and especially if traveling and space is constraint. Is there a way to put a flat seat on the Dantesca? The sling hurts my hips. Yeah, you can, instead of putting the sling on there, you can get a piece of wood, cut a couple of pieces of blocks on either side of it, and make a flat seat that will just sit down on top of the sling. Or you can do like the Serenvalta does and do the multiple legs and the scissoring multiple piece seats works just as well. The downside to putting um, a flat seat on the Dantesca is now you've got a separate piece that you have to fold up and carry around with you. Or you can get creative with it and use some hinges and make something that's attached. But if you already have a Dantesca, then that would be the quickest and simplest way. Yeah, just put a board on it, put a couple of cleats on the bottom on the outside so that it doesn't slide around too much, and then add cushion to heart's content. Next question. How are the Dantesca chairs generally with regarding to holding higher weights? What about other chair types?
Can I say something? Okay, so I'm gonna answer this one because I'm a higher weight. I've never had any problem with Dantesca chair as far as weight is concerned. It's actually really comfortable. It's the same with kind of the folding stools and stuff. It actually all holds weight pretty well. I know that it can be a little bit scary to sit down on something when you don't really know, but actually they're pretty darn comfortable, and they hold weight very well. And yes, this is hi, Mr. Steese. I can hear you giggling in the background. Yeah, that's me giggling in the background. It was just a question of what seats are your go-to in the camp. The giggling was because I knew his answer was going to be all seats because that's what we have. It's just kind of a massive amount of different chairs.
In the past, we've also done some merchanting, and our seating tends to change event to event when we merchant, because sometimes we have people buy the chairs literally out from under us. So there have been times that we've had brand new chairs we're going to do, and then poof, now I need to make new ones. The one thing that I would say, if you're making dantescas, um, a hardwood definitely helps if you're worried about weight. Um, if you're sticking with the fur, I weigh about 240 pounds, more with armor, and I have never had a whole lot of problem with my chairs. Um, some have cracked in the past. As I said, that half lap joint does make for a weak point. However, by getting a good quality hardwood like maple or oak or walnut and creating a disc that will go over that joint and then gluing it so that the grain is 90 degrees really reinforces that point and makes it significantly stronger. So if you're worried about the weight, I would definitely do that. I tend to over engineer everything that I do. So I haven't had a whole lot of problems with it. I had a folding stool deconstruct under me at one point in court. Ooh, yeah, that is my biggest fear right there. I the scariest thing to me is having somebody sitting in something I've made or something that they've bought that I've made and having it break absolutely kind of terrifies me. So I tend to over engineer. And if you ever see me at events, feel free, come by, say hi, try out a chair, and you know, see what you think. If we buy, since we don't have tools to make these currently, any suggestions on places online? Also, what should we look for in regards to quality? Um, it really depends on where you are. Shipping can be a royal pain. Most of these are irregularly shaped and they are kind of heavy. Before you're buying online, I would seriously look around you and ask around about to people. You find a lot of people that make things or are willing to try making them with some decent plans, and you'll save a lot in shipping that way. Like I said, I've made and I've sold. I just recently shipped out a folding stool the other day. I'm in Ontario. I live in the Olympia area, um, and I do take commissions. However, I don't know of a whole lot of people that sell. You can try Etsy. As far as what you should look for, the biggest one there is going to be anyone who sells. Read their feedback, see what people have said about the stuff, and keep an eye on. Um, Lost my train of thought there. Uh, go with the feedback. Ask questions. If you have any questions, ask what their return policy are. I stand behind anything I make. If you buy something from me and it breaks, talk to me and we will make it right. I will either replace it or repair it at my discretion. Peter asked, "Do you have plans for the Dantesca chair?" Yes, I do. If you go to my blog, which should be in the link and on the handout, if you can't find it, then let me know and I can give you a direct link to it. I have a full walkthrough on my last set of Dantesca chairs with plans and step by step how as I was doing it. You're very welcome. Do we have any other questions? Glad you enjoyed it. As I said, the classes will be edited. Everything was recorded, and they should be put up online within the next 24 to 48 hours. If you keep an eye for the event site page, it should be listed on there. Or if you go and look at earlysweden.wordpress.com, there should be links to all of the classes, as well as links to where you're going for. Um, Yeah. I believe the next class coming up is me again, isn't it? Next Wednesday, or this coming Wednesday, we'll be doing a class on household bentwood objects and boxes. So I think that's it. I hope everybody enjoyed. Have a great Sunday, and look forward to seeing things you made.